In this lecture, we're going to cover prototyping. So prototyping in amongst itself is not its own life cycle or methodology, but I thought it was important that we cover and explain what prototyping is, as we have discussed different pieces of it as we've worked through the different methodologies. So starting out, prototyping is used in iterative methodologies. So methodologies that are creating something, you're creating a prototype, basically a mock draft of what that end result will look like, and the level of how far it is depends on kind of how much time was put in prior to prototyping. You prototype it, you get feedback, you get updates and thoughts, and then you're working back through your analysis, design, development to then put that feedback into place and build the next version of the prototype. So like I mentioned, prototyping isn't its own methodology. It's used generally in conjunction with Spiral, Rapid Application Development, RAD, and the incremental model. So those are the models that this kind of gets put in with. It really can get put in with any type of methodology that has an incremental approach or an iterative approach. Prototyping, you're breaking things down into smaller segments, or you're breaking the requirements down into what's important. You're then building it and calling it a prototype, meaning that this isn't the end result. It's not the end goal, and it hasn't really been fully vetted out or tested. But here is an example of what we're kind of designing this out to look like, and here's some of the functionality with it. And those prototypes are iterated through until they end up meeting all of those user requirements, all those business needs. Kind of one of the bad parts about it is prototypes are generally discarded. So you may build a prototype, they may give you a bunch of feedback, the users, the business might, and you may end up scrapping that prototype and kind of starting over or going a different direction in design. So you usually are working through and discarding prototypes as you go. And that final prototype is usually discarded because there's usually some key changes that need to be made as you get into ready for production. And so it's kind of a lot of time that you end up wasting on creating these prototypes. And one of the other nice things, or one of the other things with prototyping, is the business users involved. So they're seeing something tangible. They're working with that particular software, that product, and they're able to give that feedback and make sure that it's going in the direction that they had imagined. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of prototyping. Well, the one thing is it gives users a visual of their wants and needs. So you told us this is what your requirements were. This is how we translated it into something of use, something tangible, and they can kind of see that and give some feedback there. It promotes user participation and communication. So you're not waiting until the end to try to get some of that communication, some of that feedback. You're promoting it throughout because you're showing them, okay, here's a prototype. What do you think of this? It allows progress even when you're unsure of requirements. So one of the downfalls of a very linear model like the waterfall model is you can't really start on the design and the development until you understand all of the requirements, right? I mean, you have to go through and you design everything, or analyze all those requirements, document them before you move to the design, and so on and so forth. Well, this type of model, this type of iterative fashion works where, okay, well, we know a subset of the requirements, so let's go ahead and build a prototype knowing that, and we'll figure out those other requirements as we go. And it encourages innovation. So as you create that prototype, then you're getting a lot of people saying, well, what if we do something like this? What if we change this? What if we make the user interface different like this? And you're able to innovate and keep making that particular software product better. So then the end users are extremely happy with the end result. So what are some of the cons? Well, one thing is if you have strict approval processes, you want to say, okay, at this certain stage, we want to approve the requirements that were defined, and we want to approve the design, and we want to approve the coding. There's not very good, there's not a stage gate, a toll gate to work through to that next phase. In an iterative model and a prototyping model, you're kind of working through that, and you don't need to get that formal approval. So it's very loose approvals. Another thing is non-functional requirements are really tough to identify. So non-functional requirements are things that are not tangible. It's not clicking a button having certain actions happen. It's not certain pieces there. But non-functional requirements could be usability, it could be security, it could be performance. And those are generally tough to identify because you're really saying, okay, well, here are all the needs. Here's the needs I need to fulfill with this particular product. Here are the particular challenges I have, and here are the features and enhancements that can take away those challenges. It's very tough to pull out, okay, who needs access to certain pieces of data within the system, and other non-functional types of requirements. Another piece is that it can lead to really poorly designed systems. So as you're kind of starting out, you're starting with a subset of requirements. Well, you work with that subset of requirements you designed in a certain way. But later on, maybe 2 iterations later, you learn some other requirements. Well, man, if I would have known those requirements at the beginning, I would have designed this solution completely different. And you're kind of too late. You're too far into the project generally to usually scrap and start over and redesign the architecture. So you're having to kind of build on top of it. So if you've ever worked with a system that's gotten older and an IT team's tried to keep up with all the changes, but the system's gotten old and clunky and there's band-aids everywhere, there's not good documentation, understanding how everything works, that's what happens as you're working through the initial build sometimes in the prototyping model. And then the last thing is the business can sometimes think that, oh, I've got this prototype, the software that I'm using, it looks perfect, so we're ready to go, right? I mean, let's launch this. Well, what they don't understand is there's a lot of back-end things that haven't been created for that prototype, that you built it in a way that just shows them the feature. You haven't fully vetted out and built all of the pieces of that. You haven't integrated it with other systems. And so business users can get a little antsy in the pantsy, if you will, and want to, hey, let's push this out. Let's go. This is perfect. And you have to really curb their enthusiasm and say, you know, it's not done. We're not ready to go out at that point. And so you can get a little pushback there. So when is it good to use prototyping? Well, one nice thing, as with all iterative models, it's when the objectives are unclear, those requirements are unclear, you're not really sure where you're going. You know what the initial requirements are, but you're not sure kind of how that's going to evolve. You have a high pressure to implement something. So again, another iterative thing. They need something. We need to see something, some type of prototype, something. This helps a lot with that. If your requirements are going to be changing a lot, that's another reason, and that's a great thing for any iterative model. You have minimal resource constraints. So as you're working through, you're going to have this team engaged and you're going to have the developers engaged. But quite often as you work through these different iterations, you need to have resources available. You don't need strict approval processes. Since this particular model doesn't have good approval processes, and it's kind of very, very loose, you want to make sure that there isn't a requirement or a need to have a strict approval at the different stages. And then the other reason to use this is if you want innovative and flexible designs that want to accommodate future changes. So if you're working in technology and you say, you know what, this is new technology, we're not really sure what we're getting into, let's go ahead and build this piece out, and then we'll see where we're at. You know, in 2 months, we'll see what the technology's become, what we've learned, and learn where to innovate and where to take this to. So that's another good time to use the prototype model.